LifeCell is India's first and largest stem cell bank, situated in Chennai with its technological partner Cryocell International, which is the world's first private stem cell bank. The samples arrive at LifeCell laboratory facility in a cold vehicle. The lab attenders receives the sample and then arranges it in a trolley to take it to the sample receipt area. The sample receipt personnel enters the receipt area with the sample and scans the POD number and the kit box number. The sample receipt personnel opens the outer covering box. The temperature is checked with the help of the digital thermometer and it's documented. The sample is placed in the SS trolley. The purple card is scanned and all the client details flows into the mandatory fields in the software to generate the barcode labels. The labels are verified with the purple card. And the personnel opens the thermocol box and segregates the samples. The blood bag is sealed using a tube sealer. The excess tube is discarded. The blood bag weight is checked and is cleaned with 70% isopropyl alcohol. The personnel sticks the generated label on the blood bag and places it in the sterile kit box. The cord tissue and the maternal blood samples are cleaned by using 70% isopropyl alcohol with sterile gauze. The generated labels are pasted on the respective tube and are placed in the tube stand. The sample which is ready for processing is kept in the cold room by the sample receipt personnel. The store personnel takes the indented materials and prepares the processing kit and segregates the kit for processing. The prepared processing kit is placed in the clean room pass box. The executive flashes the access card to enter the clean room and walks on the sticky mat. The executive now washes the hand up to elbow with the disinfectant and wears the sterilized primary garment, followed by sterile gloves, head cap, and face mask. The executive enters the airlock room and disinfects the gloved hands. The executive walks slowly in the corridor and enters into the secondary gowning area. The executive should wear the buffnut cap, bunny suit, and the booties before entering the processing room. The processing kit is taken from the pass box and is scanned before using. The executive wipes his hand with alcohol and calculates the blood volume from the blood bag. The executive wipes the blood bag with betadine solution using a sterilized gauze, which is followed by wiping it with 70% isopropyl alcohol. The executive pastes the barcode labels in the Vacutainer. The pre-sample is mixed and aspirated. The aspirated pre-sample is injected into the Vacutainer for the pre-nucleated cell count analysis. The executive aspirates the hydroxyethyl starch and slowly injects it into the cord blood bag. The executive seals the injected site with a tube sealer. The pre-sample syringe needle is discarded in sodium hypochlorite solution. The Vacutainer is scanned for EBPR entry. The sample is kept in the centrifugation bucket and its weight is checked. The executive adjusts the exact weight for proper centrifugation. The bucket is now placed inside a refrigerated centrifuge at the exact opposite end for proper balancing. The program is set for a low-speed centrifugation. While the sample is being centrifugated, the executive will paste the barcode label in the transfer freezing bag. Once the spinning stops, the centrifuge lid is opened and the sample is taken out slowly and is kept safely in the laminar airflow. The cord blood bag is removed slowly and is hanged in the hooks provided in the laminar airflow. The cord blood bag contains 3 layers, while the top layer is plasma, followed by buffy coat and the red blood cells. The cord blood bag is kept in the manual plasma expressor. The executive inserts the spike from the transfer freezing bag to the cord blood collection bag. The executive folds the bag after the transfer of buffy coat to prevent the flow of RBCs. The air bubble is an indication for the executive to clamp the tube for the prevention of RBC entry into the transfer bag. transfer bag is properly mixed and the same is scanned for EBPR entry. The connected tube is sealed with tube sealer and the executive separates and discards the collection bag which contains the red blood cells. The executive folds the transfer freezing bag for the proper setup in the centrifuge. The same is now placed into a bucket for high-speed centrifugation with exact balance at the opposite end. After the second spin, the samples are taken to the auto volume expressor. The samples are kept in the auto volume expressor to remove the excess plasma with the help of the sensor. The retained set volume contains hematopoietic stem cells which are present at the bottom, considered to be the final product. The port of the Buffycoat bag and plasma bag are wiped with betadine solution followed by 70% isopropyl alcohol. The post sample is mixed and aspirated slowly from the Buffycoat bag. The same is now added to the plasma bag and later to the vacutainer for the post sample analysis. The vacutainer is scanned for the electronic BPR entry. The plasma bag is detached. The labels are pasted on the Bactec bottles, followed by the alcohol swab wiping. The plasma is aspirated and injected into the Bactec bottles for sterility check. The cryoprotectant is aspirated and injected slowly into the Buffycoat bag after being wiped with alcohol swab. The product is transferred to the final freezing bag after eliminating the air bubbles. The bags and the tubes are sealed and separated. The sealed bags and the tubes are now placed into the overwrap bags. The bags are kept for overwrap sealing. The sealed bags are now placed into the aluminium pouches. The samples are kept in the pass box for cryo storage. The executive takes the culture dish with sterile medium from the carbon dioxide incubator and places it in the laminar airflow. The cod tissue vials are scanned for electronic BPR entry and is wiped with 70% isopropyl alcohol. The wiped tissues are now transferred to the laminar airflow. The forceps and the scalpels with surgical blade are prepared. The cod tissue is taken from the vial which contains the cocktail antibiotics, and the same is placed into the wash solution and mixed well. The cod tissue is placed into the glass Petri plate and it is chopped. The limited number of chopped tissues is placed into the culture media. The remaining tissue is chopped and phosphate buffer saline is added to prevent tissue drying. The plasma is added into the cryotubes, after which the chopped tissue is filled into it. The filled cryotubes with cryoprotectant is placed into the pass box for cryo storage. The cultured dish is kept into the carbon dioxide incubator at 37 degrees Celsius. The executive opens the carbon dioxide incubator to take the culture dish from the incubator for media change. The used media is aspirated from the tissue culture dish. The fresh media is now added to the culture plate. The culture plate with fresh media is now again placed into the carbon dioxide incubator. The executive takes the culture plate from the carbon dioxide incubator. The executive confirms the desired confluency of mesenchymal stem cells in the inverted microscope. The used media and tissue chunks are discarded by using the Pasteur pipette. The phosphate buffer saline is added to wash away the serum-based media in order to ensure proper trypsin activity. The trypsin EDTA is added to the tissue culture dish and the same is mixed well. And it is kept into the incubator for the detachment of mesenchymal stem cells. The detached cells are observed under the microscope for confirmation. The serum-based inactivation medium is added to inhibit the trypsin activity. The executive flushes the cells using a Pasteur pipette and places it into the tube for centrifugation. The executive takes the tube to the centrifugator and performs centrifugation with correct balancing at the opposite end. After centrifugation, the supernatant is transferred to the Eppendorf tube for sterility check. The remaining suspension is discarded. The fresh media is added to the pellet and the same is mixed well. Tryphan blue dye is placed to a new Eppendorf tube to which the cell suspension is added. The suspension is mixed with the dye and the same is added to the cell counter slide. The slide is now kept into the cell counter for quantitative analysis. Once the cell count meets the specification, the suspension is placed in the cryovial with the cryoprotectant. The cryovial is placed in the pass box for cryostorage. The executive degowns the secondary garment and discards them in the laundry bin before entering the corridor. The executive takes out the street garment from the exit pass box and enters into the exit room where the executive removes the gloves and the primary gowns. The executive leaves the clean room. The executive flashes his access card and enters the cryo room with the processed samples. The sample is placed in the controlled rate freezer. The software will initiate the alarm to notify the executive to press the stop button once the desired temperature is achieved. The executive safely transfers the sample from the control rate freezer to the cryo cart by using PPE. The cryo cart is moved to the liquid nitrogen vessel where the sample will be stored. The executive opens the liquid nitrogen vessel and removes the empty cryo box and then replaces it with the filled vials. The sample is stored at -196 degrees Celsius in the liquid phase. The temperature data logger is placed into the conditioned dry shipper and the executive places the sample container with the sample into the dry shipper for transportation.